you're planning a self-build, you might have come across the term eco-home through your research. It's important to say the term eco-home. It's not a definition in the way that the term passive house, which you might have heard, is. Instead, an eco-home is more like a philosophy. It's a way of doing things. It's an aspiration, and it's an aspiration for the design and the overall intent. Now, if we've not met, my name is Pete Markos. I'm an architect and I'm the director of Markos Design Workshop. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 4 key principles which we've established to designing and building eco homes, and why I think they matter when undertaking your own self-build. Okay, so there are 4 points, 4 main things I think differs what I'd term an eco home to a more traditional architect design home. So they are, number 1 is orientation, so how the home is situated, or even an extension is situated on the site. Number 2, how materials are used. Number 3 is the project size. And then number 4 is the method of construction. So I think on that, the question is, how does an eco home differ from a normal home, and maybe more importantly, how we're seeing other homes being designed on the market. So what we see a lot in magazines, built, an extreme example would be a place like Dubai, is if I was to draw an elevation, you would have the main elevation of the home. There's a person stand there, and this would all be glazing, so the front elevation would all be glazing. Now, there is absolutely nothing inherently wrong with using glazing, bifold doors. They can be great additions, but what we see a lot is these spaces overheat, and because the spaces are overheating, the spaces need to overcompensate for the overheating. So that's where mechanical cooling, mechanical ventilation comes in, etc., which is obviously very costly and very bad for the environment. If you compare this to, in Cairo in the 1600s, there were a type of homes built by the Ottomans, and what they had were, essentially, you had the home, so this was the main house, it had a courtyard space there, then the sort of local courtyard there, and then adjacent would be another building, the neighbouring building, the street, and that would have like quite a small space between it, so only be about 5 meters, maybe even smaller. Then the natural sunlight which would come through here would be blocked off by what are known as mashrabeyas. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but essentially the mashrabeyas were a bit like windows as such, but they have a texture which stops excess natural sunlight coming in, but it also allows people to look out the window. On top of that, where the courtyard was, where the water is, the water would evaporate and cool through the house, so the water would come through the house and keep the home cool. Now, the reason this matters is the outside temperature would very often be, let's say, 37 degrees, but because of this combination of what are known as passive cooling methods, such as mashrabeya, such as the courtyard space, the outside temperature would be 37 degrees, inside it would be a nice cool 18 degrees. So it does just show the difference that can be made through a home which is designed to utilise and use the environment. So if we start with principle number one, so principle one is the orientation. You know, how the home's being orientated. Now, what you typically have, well, not typically, you do have, is the sun rises on the east, and then it obviously sets on the west. So if this is a sun path diagram, you find and then obviously you've got north pointing that way. What we find is, move this, so you got the home, and orientation really matters. You know, do we want the home to just be a perfect box facing the south, or instead would it be far better if the home was somewhat at an angle, and that maybe you have the lounge dining space here, and then that benefits from east sunlight and south light on that side, whereas here would probably be better having, let's say, the kitchen. So you've got the kitchen there, the lounge diner here. Usually it wouldn't then make sense to have on the north side things like an office space, bathroom, you know, maybe even like the main entrance, etc. Now, the reason this matters is, you know, an office, you might want like quite a consistent light. You might not. For example, my office is east facing, so when I go in the office really early in the morning, I get nice sunlight coming in from the east. That does have its downsides. The downside is throughout the day I often have just really strong sunlight coming through the windows, so unfortunately I have to shut the windows. So in that sense it often makes better sense to have the office positioned somewhere like the north. Anyway, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, and we've got the lounge and diner on the south side here, same with the kitchen, but often, particularly the way summers are starting to move in the UK where summers are so hot, you might actually want an overhang. The reason for an overhang is, if I draw this in section, what you often have is, let's say that's your roof overhang. That's a person who's quite big. So I've drawn that too big. But anyway, look, we'll keep that as it is. Let's say if this is in winter what you have is, that's your outside, that's your inside. What you have is you've got the sun, and it's a lot lower in winter than it is in summer. Now the reason this matters is that allows for sunlight to just go through the window. Now if we just take a step back a second, in summer the sun is a lot higher. Now what that means is the sun will come down and it will partly hit the overhang. So that's the purpose of the overhang. It allows more sun in winter, but less sun in summer when you just don't need it. So it's key decisions like that which determine and manage excess sunlight and allow for a comfortable space throughout the year. Now, I'd say a good example most people understand with this being done badly is conservatories. So, I mean, obviously we're talking in broad terms, but the sort of quite cheap conservatories you see added to the back of people's homes, most people who build them, I think, live to regret them. They build them because they think, oh, it's a cheapish way of adding space, but because they're so overexposed, because they're all glazing, they're way too hot in summer, and then they're way too cold in winter. So they just become unusable spaces. And we get a lot of projects where part of the project and part of the work is actually just demolishing a previously built conservatory. With that in mind though, for a lot of people, this is principle 2, cost is really important. And one thing I always think makes a big difference to the cost of a project is the size of the project. So what we see quite a lot is you can see other projects or maybe something selling online, etc., and it might be architect design home, but it's just way too big. It's way bigger than it needs to be. It has various bedrooms. Maybe that's bedroom 1, bedroom 2, bathroom. And then within that you'd have some really large corridor and then other spaces. Maybe more bedrooms. Bedroom. Let's say, and then here could be, some kind of playroom. Now, space needs to be designed sparingly, I think, and to fulfill the purpose of actually what is needed. Now, if that's the space you need, and if that's the space you want, fair enough. Often that's not the case, and you see a lot of homes which are designed to be a lot bigger than they need to be or should be. So what you want to really be doing is designing the space you need. We shouldn't have long corridors, L-shaped corridors, or more bedrooms which are needed. I think this matters for 2 reasons. The first is what's known as the opportunity cost. Now, the opportunity cost is very simply, this is one opportunity, which is to design all this space. The other opportunity is to save that money, save that budget, and invest it elsewhere in the home. And that's things to do with the quality of materials, the quality of construction. Maybe it gives you more of a budget for how you spend on the landscape, which is incredibly important to the home. How's the garden designed, where's the garden designed, etc. So those things are all really important, and there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of homes I see which are not critical about the space which is needed. On top of that, let's say, for argument's sake, you have 10 square meters more than you need, and each square meter in the construction costs £3,500, for example, per square meter. If you can save 10 square meters, you'd be saving yourself about £35,000. So again, I think that's why it's really important to work with an architect who's prepared to design the space you need, and not just a vanity project or little consideration for the space just to make something which maybe looks good in visuals or looks good in photos. So that's a really key consideration. So principle number 3 is use of material. I think this matters a lot because what often happens is, if we were to draw a section through the typical building, you'd have obviously this is the inside, outside, you've got your garden. You've got cladding on the main structure, cladding internally, cladding on the flooring, etc. And essentially, in the most reductive, basic sense, there's 2 types of materials, or 2 ways of applying materials. You can either opt for synthetic materials or more natural materials. The problem with synthetic materials is that has a process known as what we call off-gassing, and off-gassing is the material just releases chemicals that it's holding in. So this is quite common in materials like formaldehydes, which are a type of plastic which can't be recycled. These are commonly used in plug sockets. You find this a lot in types of insulation, such as Celtec, which, you know, have really great insulating properties, but they're full of chemicals. And this isn't just some environmental theory. It's been very well substantiated that these materials do off gas, and they do produce chemicals, and they do that for considerable years. You know, this isn't something that happens for a couple of weeks and then that's the last you hear of it. So that's why we really want to be looking at using natural materials, and that is, the natural materials come in, you know, how you insulate the space, you know, what these walls are filled off, what the externals filled off, the insulation, you know, do we need to have Celtec, or could we use some other form of insulation to fill the walls? You know, hempcrete, for example, is a good example. And I think the key thing is, there's not, with materials, is there's not just like a cookie list or a list of materials to say use these materials. It's very much dependent on the site, the project, the client needs. How these materials come together matters a lot. You know, in some instances you might be able to use one type of insulation, but in other instances you can't, and that insulation could create moisture issues, let's say. So there's a lot of consideration which goes into choosing the materials, and it shouldn't just be a arbitrary choice. Now, principle number 4, and this is what I'd probably say this is my favourite. Principle 4, because I think it's just where most of my interests are, and on top of that, it's also in many ways where the world's going. Now, principle 4 is methods of construction, so how the project is being constructed. So if we've got a sort of typical section. Now, what we might have, let's say this is the main structural frame, and you know, that's where your glazing is, etc. This can be made up of a series of what are known as cassettes. They're kind of similar to what you might know as SIP panels. So they're made up of small bits of Lego block, and how that translates is you have, you know, one block like that, and that's just full of insulation, and it's made of OSB board. So you've got a layer of OSB board, and then just insulation internally, and then on top of that you get a sort of separate piece of OSB, and then it's added on top. The key thing with a method of construction like this, which is known as a modern method of construction, is these cassettes are typically made in a factory, and they're delivered to site, and then they're assembled together to make the overall structure. But one of the interesting things with this is, I think a lot of people think, oh, my project, if I do this, my project's going to look really boxy, or it's going to just look like a box of sorts, and that couldn't be any further from the truth. One of the good things about modern methods of construction is it allows for really complicated structures to be made. For example, our monocoque cabin, it had what we'd call various double curves, and that's where the spline and the curve in the structure goes two ways. So the main structure essentially looked like this, and then the cassettes made up the full structure, so that made up like the full piece, and it was raised off the ground. And the good thing it was just dropped off on site, and it was transported on site and through like a couple of lorry loads, and then we were able to assemble it on site. So I think within about a day, maybe 2 days, they had the whole structure put up. One of the great things with this method of construction, this modern method, is it also allows for a greater level of cost certainty and cost forecasting, because the contractors can be really accurate with it because it's all done digitally, whereas traditional methods, traditional construction is traditional in its nature, and sometimes there are variations which occur due to the site, due to unforeseen things, etc. So, as discussed at the start of the video, the term eco-home is a philosophy, and although it's not got a set definition, the 4 principles we've established are incredibly key. Materials, orientation, the size of the structure, methods of construction. So if you are thinking about an eco-home, you can either get in touch and book a free consultation with myself, or I've actually written an article on some of the costs associated with eco-homes, and that's also a link in the description. Looking forward to seeing you soon though.